Hello, my name's Rachel and I work for Step 2 Young People's Health. This video is about brain development. I'd like to make it very clear that I am a teacher. I am not a psychologist or an expert in brain development. However, I have come across lots of information over the years that suggest how brain development affects teenage behaviour particularly, but also young people, young adolescents as well. So hopefully you'll get some information from this video that will help. Okay, so we know that the brain doesn't finish developing until your mid to late 20s. One of the last regions to develop is the prefrontal cortex, which you can see at the front there. This is the area that's responsible for planning, prioritising and controlling impulses. Because of that, young people, teenagers especially, their understanding of risk is very low. So you can sit a teenager down and say you shouldn't do this for X, Y and Z reasons, and they will understand what you're saying to them, but they won't necessarily understand that on a deeper level. They won't have that sense of fear and of risk around the issue. So teenage brains have lots of plasticity. This means that they can change a lot. They adapt to responding to the environment that they're in. They are still growing. This is why teenagers need a lot of extra sleep, because the brain's still growing. Lots of things can help develop the brain in certain areas, so their exposures to exercise, to creative activities like music and art, any kind of mental challenges. I mean, that could be something as simple as doing a Sudoku or any other kind of problem solving activities in the real world. They all really help to strengthen the brain and help it develop. However, because teenagers are going through puberty and are experiencing so many changes throughout their body, all driven by brain chemistry, it can make them more vulnerable to mental health issues and stress. Now, it's perfectly normal for everybody to experience some mental health issues, to be a bit stressed about things, to have low self-esteem in the short term, to get some anxiety. The problem comes when that becomes an inhibitor to your daily life. If it's affecting your daily life every day, then that's when it's become a problem, and that's when you should seek support. So as I just mentioned about sleep, it is a scientific fact that teenagers need more sleep than anybody else. They should get about 9 to 10 hours. They won't, because they're too busy playing on PlayStations and texting friends and things in the middle of the night. But actually there's a reason for that as well. The point where they get sleepy is much later than anybody else. So we all have a sleep hormone called melatonin, and it exists in different levels within our body and it changes during the day. So the top left bit there, the getting sleepy section, that talks about melatonin and when it kind of kicks in. Any blue light that comes from electronic devices and things suppresses melatonin, and this is why they say you shouldn't use your phones and things late on a night, because it stops you from sleeping. Teenagers will have a big energy dip. They won't feel fully awake until 9 or 10 a.m. This is why on the continent and in other countries school starts later than ours do, and that's because they understand that teenagers aren't fully with it first thing on a morning. Later on in the day, body temperature will rise, it'll go up throughout the morning, and that's when they start to kind of wake up and when they're sort of more responsive to you. But then again in the afternoon they'll have a slump. Adults see this energy dip a bit earlier. Snacks, naps, exercise, all of those things can help with that. Lack of sleep can make life extremely difficult. You stop being able to pay attention to things. It increases your irritability and your impulsivity. You can end up with depression if it's a long-term thing. It can be quite pervasive, lack of sleep. It can sort of invade every part of your life. Okay, so I've just put this up so that you can see some of the different areas of the brain. I'm not going to explain most of them. I'm not even going to try. But you can see in the top left picture, you've got the frontal lobe, which is the whole area at the front there. It's labelled number 13. On the next one you can see it in the cross section as well. It's quite a large area, and this is the bit that's not fully developed until later on, until potentially the 20s. Like I said, this is the area that's responsible for risk. So if your young person is taking risks that you think are daft, you know, we see it very, very sadly, we see it a lot in the news when a child has died because they've gone swimming in a quarry or a river and they've ended up with cold water shock or something. And, you know, there's always the comments of they'll never learn, will they? Well, no, because the brain hasn't developed that risk sense yet. So young people are going to continue to do those activities because their brain doesn't know that it's risky or doesn't appreciate and understand just how risky it is. So I'm going to go through the different stages of brain development just to give you an idea of what's going on in the brain. So this is the sensory motor stage, and it's from birth up to 2 years. So you can see in the biological changes that your brain goes from really quite small to 25% of the adult size to 50% of the adult size in 2 years. So again, babies need lots of naps because there's a lot going on the inside that you can't see. Okay, and then they will start to develop these milestones. You know, they'll start sitting up, they'll be collecting vocabulary, they're listening, they're alert, they know what's going on. You've got your pre-operational stage, which is generally between 2 years and 7 years, and in this time your brain grows to 90% of its adult size. So it's developing really, really quickly at this point. This is where children will start being able to do hops and skips. They'll start speaking short sentences. There's a lot of role playing imaginary friends at this age because that's the part of the brain that's the most engaged. They'll start to learn things like reading, writing, drawing. They'll be able to say the alphabet. The primitive reasoning bit, if you've got young children, or if you remember when your current children were younger, or, you know, if you've got little brothers or sisters or anything like that, you will probably recognise this as them just saying why to everything. So, okay, what colour's the sky? It's blue. Why? Why are we doing this? Why is that like that? Why is that colour? Why does a crocodile have teeth? Why, you know, all of those why questions, and parents are sitting there completely flummoxed thinking, I don't know, it just is. But that's the primitive reasoning coming, and it's because that part of the brain is stimulated and is growing really quickly, so they just want to know. They're like little information sponges. They just want to know everything. So then you've got your concrete operational stage. So this is sort of later primary school, year 7 through to 11. And different parts of the brain start to engage now. Different parts of the brain start to grow more. So you've got frontal and temporal lobe growth. In the second bit, your sex hormones start to increase. Obviously, we know that as puberty. Okay, so again, skills are developing. They are looking at reasoning for different things, you know, but they'll question that themselves rather than it being that why. They can kind of try and start figuring things out from themselves like that. Okay, so this is the formal operational stage. It's the last bit. Okay, and it starts at 11, it goes all the way through the teenage years and up to adulthood. So again, different systems are coming in. You've got your limbic system developing. The brain development does start to slow down at this point. Okay, so this is where it'll hit 100%. Okay, but it will slow down significantly. So you saw massive changes up to 2 years and then again up to 4 years. There aren't significant amounts of change and growth. They kind of do things in more depth now, whereas before it was snap, 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 everything's working. Now they're looking at things in more depth and building more into the actual structure of the brain. So 11 to 14 years, this is where they become more conscious of the body image. They're being influenced by others. They're starting to develop deductive reasoning. They're looking at abstract thinking, so they're looking at different concepts and things. Again, in the next bit, this is where it's pretty much just the prefrontal lobe that's not developed. So this is where you see the risky behaviours, you get the behavioural changes, you get your arguments with your teenagers, they start to experience an identity crisis, they hate everything about you, they hate everything about themselves. You know, it's really, really difficult for everybody. The arguments between teenagers and their parents, it's not the teenagers' fault. They, you know, if they had to sit down and choose, they probably wouldn't choose to be like that. It's literally because this bit of the brain is so underdeveloped compared to the others. 18 to 21, despite thinking you know everything and you're an adult now and you can do what you want, you don't need your parents anymore, actually you're still developing. Okay, so your parent-child conflict is resolving, you become more self-assured in yourself, you start to have emotional growth. At this point you might leave home for the first time if you're going off to university perhaps, but your risk centre still isn't fully developed. Okay, so just remember that if you're going off to live on your own, you don't know everything yet, or you might be going to live in halls of residence and it's basically a bunch of teenagers who have very little risk factors. You know, they don't understand risk particularly well. Put them all in halls of residence together, I'm sure they'll be absolutely fine. So this is why parents get quite stressed and quite worried when their teenagers go off to university. From 22 years plus, brain development will slow down. It will be complete by the mid to late 20s. That depends on you, really. You know, and you might move on to different milestones in your life. You might do some of these things. You might not do some of these things. You know, you might focus on a career. You might not. You might want to continue learning and expanding your horizons. You might start to settle down with long-term relationships and things. Alternatively, you might not. Okay, but this is where your brain is. It's pretty much got everything it's going to need. The prefrontal cortex is now much more developed and you've started to work out various risks associated with things. So again, to give a practical example, in the 18 to 21 years and the 22 plus, we often hear news stories about young people getting into cars, potentially with people they don't know, or they are driving them really, really fast in areas where that's not advisable. And, you know, there's an element of that person's brain, their prefrontal cortex may not have fully developed yet, so they don't get the risk associated with that. You know, despite seeing it in the news all the time, that doesn't matter. That's a totally different part of the brain. Their risk centre, if it's not fully developed, they're going to keep doing those things, sadly. Okay, so some support and advice and guidance and things. If you're a young person and you need some support and you're struggling a little bit, you've got Childline. They can help you with pretty much everything. If they don't have the answers, they will help you with where to find them. Okay, but Childline has access to lots of information, lots of professionals and counsellors, things like that, that can help you and support you. Equally, the NHS, you know, if you're struggling a little bit and you think something's not quite right, by all means, that's what it's there for. I work for Step 2, we're a sexual health and mental health charity, so we support young people with counselling and things like that, and you can see our social media handles there. But working in conjunction with James and Hale, we also offer relationships and sex education across the Bradford district. There will be other local support services if you are not in the Bradford area. It's worthwhile just having a little Google and see what you can find. If you're a young person, I'd maybe check with an adult first just to see if it looks like a sort of legit form of information. But obviously the national charities like Mind and Couth and Young Minds and things like that will be able to help you if it's a mental health issue. Childline's always a good place to start though.